The Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the spending priorities and missions of the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Thank you for being here today as we examine President Trump's budget priorities for the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service. I'd like to welcome Chief Christensen joining us once again on behalf of the Forest Service and Deputy Director Ned for making the trek from BLM's new Grand Junction headquarters all the way to our nation's capital. As you both know, this is my first Congress serving as chairwoman of the subcommittee, but I'm already having deja vu. Since last year, we've continued to urge our agencies to respond to the existential threat of climate change. We've been asking you to listen to the voices of the American people, and especially the tribal communities who have known the lands your agencies manage since time immemorial. But these requests have been ignored, and here we are once again reviewing the budget proposals that significantly underinvest in the future of our public lands and continue to advance the President's energy dominance agenda, putting profits over people and pollution over protection. This special interest agenda is clear in your budget requests, which propose cuts to conservation, to water and wildlife protections, and to programs that prioritize climate change and scientific research. In the years since we were last here, the Forest Service has moved ahead with rulemaking to remove old-growth protections from the Tongass and to weaken the National Environmental Policy Act, one of our most important bedrock environmental laws. BLM continues its efforts to open Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante to new mining, drilling, and destructive activities, despite significant local and national opposition. And last week, BLM released plans that would allow drilling near Chaco Canyon, which is my ancestral homeland. To top it off, under the guise of putting staff closer to the communities, the administration has done its best to dismantle the Bureau of Land Management. While this administration pays lip service to prioritizing access, make no mistake that the extractive activities pushed by this administration are the most exclusive and restrictive land use, degrading our lands at the expense of wildlife, recreation, and habitat protection. The American people want public lands that support clean air, clean water, and access for outdoor recreation, not fenced-off mines, piles of contaminated waste rock, pools of fracking water, and abandoned oil rigs. But under this administration, we continue to see an unprecedented rollback of protections for our forests and public lands. Some are headline-grabbing efforts to roll back national monuments, drill in the Arctic refuge, and mine in the boundary waters. Other actions are more under the radar, like removing the administrative protection for millions of acres through the BLM planning process or using timber targets as a metrics for forest health. This administration seems to be willing to stop at nothing to advance the president's extractive vision. This is a vision that does not match up with what our constituents want, and I'd like to hear from you both about how this budget supports the American people's clear interest in protecting our lands, waters, and wildlife. I'm hoping for some reassurances about your intent to listen to the American people who want to see our public lands as part of the climate solution, because the priorities in this budget would seem to only add fuel to the fire. As I cautioned last year, I fully recognize that Congress holds the purse strings, and I do not consider a reminder of this fact an appropriate answer to a budget question. As you both know, a budget is also about priorities and values. Your budget speaks to this administration's goals, and the appropriations bills Congress has set you make clear our intent for your agencies to pursue a balanced mission. I look forward to hearing your answers. And with that, I yield back and will turn to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the Chair noted, today the subcommittee meets to review the FY 2021 budget request of the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service. Together, these two land management agencies manage roughly 20% of the land in our nation. That percentage is considerably higher for those of us in the west of the Mississippi River. In my home state of Utah alone, the BLM and Forest Service manage over 30 million acres, which amounts to roughly 57% of the state. And in my district, some counties are over 90% public land. As a former mayor, it's hard for me to imagine how having control of only 10% of my city gives me the ability to manage the difficult problems facing these communities. I highlight these numbers to emphasize the magnitude of the influence these agencies yield. Both operate under similar multiple use and sustained yield missions, which emphasize balance in land use planning among the competing values of energy development, timber harvesting, grazing, recreation, hunting, fishing, and a variety of other uses. The decisions made by these agencies have very real impact on our environment, our economy, and our communities. I welcome the opportunity to examine and discuss the priorities put forth in the President's 2021 budget request. While the budget process provides valuable insights into the priorities of the administration, it is Congress's job to make spending decisions. As an important part of the Natural Resource Committee's oversight responsibility, and of this budget oversight hearing, is to review problem areas and make tough decisions. The agency requests being discussed here today reflect the administration's responsibility to strike the right balance of conservation, sustainable use of natural resources, active resource management, and expanding access to public lands. This budget request is also paired with a number of legislative proposals that offer bipartisan opportunities. Both agencies continue to seek to Congress's help in addressing ongoing wildfire crisis impacting our national forest and rangeland. The BLM and Forest Service have collaborated on a proposed package of common sense reforms, including categorical exclusions under NEPA to expand protected forest and fuels management in order to reduce catastrophic fire risk, improve forest and rangeland health, and improve safety for wildland firefighters. Catastrophic wildfires need to be taken seriously. In the last 10 years, there have been an average of 67,000 wildfires annually that have burned an average of roughly 7 million acres a year. To put that number in perspective, 7 million acres is roughly 250,000 acres larger than Massachusetts. These fires have also brought deadly destruction to several communities throughout the West, with over 200 tragic deaths in the last 10 years alone. I support the proposals put forth in this budget proposal to improve forest and rangeland management. It is vital that we responsibly manage our forest and rangelands, and I look forward to hearing about the ways our land management agencies intend to use their existing authorities to achieve these goals, as well as some of the additional tools that they believe are necessary. I also commend the commitment both have shown in this budget to managing the lands currently within the federal estate, as well as the continuing push to address the growing maintenance backlog plaguing our federal land management agencies. I feel confident that this is the year we will finally provide much-needed relief to our public lands infrastructure, which is crumbling under a nearly $20 billion maintenance backlog. Roughly $6 billion faces the two agencies before us today. As is the case with all budgets, there will be items that not everyone agrees with. Proposed cuts to programs, differing priorities. I do, however, want to commend the agencies for putting forward responsible and strategic visions for the future of our public lands. Republicans on this committee are ready to work on these areas of shared interest. I want to thank Chief Christensen and Deputy Director Ned for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimonies. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Curtis. Now I would like to turn to our witness panel. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when there is 1 minute left, and red when time has expired. After the witnesses have testified, members will be given the opportunity to ask questions. The chair now recognizes Ms. Victoria Christensen, Chief of the U.S. Forest Service. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Madam Chair Holland, Ranking Member Curtis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me back to testify on the President's 2021 budget for the Forest Service. Today, I will share details on hard choices that were made in our budget request and focus on 3 key areas: our progress to employ tools, authorities, and funding to confront threats to forests and support communities, the work in front of us and the challenges we must overcome, and our steadfast effort and progress to champion a strong workforce and a healthy workplace. We thank the Congress for approving the 2020 budget. We're putting funds, new authorities, and tools to good use. Trend lines point upward as we treat more forests and acres, reduce hazardous fuels, and support rural economies. We are on track to meet our timber target. So far, we are outpacing last year's work to reduce hazardous fuels. Our shared stewardship approach is gaining momentum in spirit and new agreements. We're working across boundaries to do work at the right scale in the right places. We've signed 13 agreements with states, 1 with the Western Governors Association, 25 are in progress. We've executed 245 good neighbor agreements in 38 states and doubled timber volume. We aim to build on our progress in 2021. The President's $7.38 billion budget emphasizes our critical work. It focuses work to reduce wildland fire risk, improve forest conditions and watershed health, increase access, and contribute to local economies. And it advances our shared stewardship approach, but it does reflect tough choices and trade-offs. In addition, we are seeking solutions and innovations to overcome obstacles that slow our work. We're nearing completion of reforms that will ease process burdens and reduce costs. This spring, we will finish new rules that streamline decision processes, meet our environmental responsibility, and get more work done. Efforts to modernize our budget process, increased efficiencies in firefighting, integrating science, and improving our internal systems put us in a position to better deliver our mission. We're also seeking ways to maintain a reliable infrastructure and essential for groundwork and public access. With over 370,000 miles of road and 159,000 miles of trails, the Forest Service manages the largest transportation system of all the federal land management agencies. Those roads, trails, and bridges make up the largest part of the $5.2 billion maintenance backlog. We need functioning roads and bridges to treat forests, to fight fires, and reduce fire risk. Rural Americans need functioning roads and bridges for their daily use, for outdoor activities, and emergency response. Lastly, our mission's success depends on a highly skilled, motivated workforce. We will continue our work to end sexual harassment and retaliation. We are making progress and more resolute than ever in our commitment to provide a safe, harassment-free, respectful workplace. We have taken actions, we are improving, but we must go further to permanently change our culture to one that is based on dignity, equality, and respect for all. Our strong workforce is key to our aim to create a gold standard for public service and mission delivery. It ensures we make good on the investments of this Congress and provide the services and sound stewardship this nation deserves. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. The chair now recognizes Mr. Michael Ned, Deputy Director for Operations at the Bureau of Land Management. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the President's fiscal year 2021 budget requests and priorities for the Bureau of Land Management. As mentioned, I'm Michael Ned, and I serve as the Deputy Director for Operation. The BLM manages approximately 245 million acres of surface land and over 700 million acres of subsurface mineral estate. BLM lands include some of North America's most wild, historic, and scenic landscape. We manage these lands under our mission to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the public lands for multiple use as mandated in the Federal Land Policy Management and Management Act. The BLM proposed 2021 budget reflects the priority placed on expanding access to public lands, enhancing public and stakeholders' trust, being a good neighbor in the communities that are homes to the BLM lands, and restoring regulatory balance. This includes active forest and rangeland health management, as the BLM manages close to 65 million acres of forests and woodlands across 12 western states and Alaska. The FY 2021 budget proposes investment that will allow the BLM greater flexibility in addressing fire resiliency, especially within high-risk or wildland urban interface areas. For the BLM's Rangeland Management Program, the FY 2021 budget requests $95 million, which the BLM will use to better leverage resources and address complex grazing permitting. Among the many challenges facing the BLM and its rangeland is wild horse and burro management. These herd double in size every 4 years, and to prevent overpopulation and overgrazing, the BLM gathered excess animals and offered them for adoption or sale to a good home. The FY 2021 budget provides clear direction to mitigate the unsustainable growth rate and is consistent with congressional direction to pursue a non-lethal management strategy. We look forward to working constructively with Congress and stakeholders to ensure the long-term viability of horse and burro herds while meeting BLM's land management obligation. Streamlining the permitting and planning process is a top priority of the BLM in FY 2021. In response to an executive order, the BLM has implemented Secretarial Order 3355 by establishing a 12-month approval process for an environmental impact statement, which is a remarkable improvement to a process that was taking an average of 4 years to complete. We will continue to emphasize this important streamlining work in the years ahead. The BLM is committed to the administration's priority of expanding access to the vast recreation resources on BLM-managed public lands, including enhanced opportunities for hunting, fishing, and many other uses. To this end, BLM continues to implement the Dingle Act, which will be supported by the FY 2021 funding through several program areas. The BLM continues to identify opportunities which will maximize efficiency and service to the American people by increasing BLM presence closest to the communities and land we serve. The FY 2021 budget supports the Secretary's vision for a reorganized department that aligns its regional boundaries to provide better coordination across agencies, improve mission delivery, and focus resources in the field. The BLM 2021 budget reflects the administration's continued commitment to striking the right balance of preservation and sustainability and sustainable use of resources in a way that increases energy security, enhances safety of communities, and allow America to prosper while providing proper stewardship of the lands and resources consistent with the law. The BLM takes pride in working collaboratively with its partners in these efforts, which include increasing access, enhancing outdoor recreation opportunities nationwide, while maintaining productive working landscape. The BLM look forward to working with the subcommittee as we seek the tools and resources necessary to achieve important administration objectives. Thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony.
Thank you for that valuable testimony. The chair will now recognize members for questions, and under Committee Rule 3D, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes. And I would first like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Deputy Director Ned, we now have confirmation from the GAO that the BLM reorganization had some major flaws. There was essentially no outreach to staff about what a reorganization might look like or what effects this plan might have on staff retention. As a result, GAO found that as of January 23rd, 81 of the 179 staff scheduled to relocate have left BLM. Last week, Secretary Bernhardt gave an even higher number of staff losses during a Senate hearing. By all counts, this hasty move has forced good people out of work, which has been this committee's concern since the start of this process. Can you confirm how many staff have physically relocated as of today?
Madam Chairman, thank you for that question. Today, I don't have an exact number for you, and certainly would be glad to take that question back and provide you with the exact number.
Yes, I request that. Thank you. Can you confirm how many staff have left the agency as of today?
Again, Madam Chairman, as I sit here today, I do not have an exact number, and certainly will be able to provide that number to you.
Thank you. Mr. Ned, how many headquarters staff did BLM have at the start of this administration before the hiring freeze and before this reorganization?
I am sorry, can you repeat the question, Madam Chair?
How many headquarters staff did BLM have at the start of this administration before the hiring freeze and before the reorganization?
Madam Chairman, I believe it was somewhere over 500 staff. I don't have an exact number.
Okay, would you please provide that exact number as well?
I will.
When you provide the other information, thank you. I imagine that whatever the number, it was significantly higher than the 90 or fewer staff left today. Mr. Ned, this committee has also expressed concerns that such a significant loss of staff from one of the few BLM offices with significant employment diversity might open BLM to legal actions from employees. Can you confirm how many of the employees who left the agency were persons of color?
Madam Chairman, I do not have that number here to provide to you today.
Has this relocation had a measurable impact? Has this relocation had a measurable impact on diversity at the BLM?
Madam Chairman, BLM as a whole is always working to maintain the diversity of its workforce, and we have been doing everything we can to recruit the brightest and the best employees.
So, excuse me, Mr. Ned, the question was, has this relocation had a measurable impact on diversity? So that's a yes or a no.
Again, Madam Chairman, I am not seeing that impact. And
so
again,
is the answer no?
Again, Madam Chairman,
Thank you. Thank you. I'll go on to my next question. Has the Solicitor's Office assessed any potential legal liability this move might expose the agency to?
I am not aware of that, Madam Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Our committee has asked on numerous occasions for documentation of tribal consultation on this reorganization, but we've only received documents and assurances that consultation on the DOI reorganization was sufficient. I can assure you it was not sufficient. Do you agree, yes or no, that BLM has an obligation to follow the Department of the Interior's tribal consultation policy?
I agree, we have an obligation.
Thank you. Did any formal consultation occur on the BLM-specific reorganization?
My understanding, Madam Chairman, is the department did consultation.
I think the question I asked was formal consultation.
I do not have that information for you here, Madam Chairman.
Would you please provide that also when you provide the other answers?
Be glad to.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the BLM reorganization is far from the only area where tribal voices have been ignored. I was disappointed to see that the administration's proposed updates to the Farmington Resource Management Plan selected a preferred alternative that would provide no meaningful protections against drilling near the sacred sites in and around Chaco Canyon. Once again, this administration has checked the consultation box while ignoring tribes' wishes and carrying out oil and gas industry desires. This is especially disheartening when we're talking about drilling around a site explicitly intended to protect tribal cultural resources. So I'd like to formally state for the record that the administration's preferred alternative is inadequate to protect the sacred site, and I'd encourage you to work with New Mexico delegation and stakeholders on the ground to develop meaningful protections. And the chair, thank you, I yield, and the chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chief Christensen, in my district, we have what's called the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. It's a partially completed project that, when completed, will stretch 280 miles through Utah. This multi-use trail will connect communities and also take pressure off our overused canyons. While LWCF funds have been used to help complete parts of the trail, there remains a lot of work to be done. And local Forest Service staff has said that some areas are not eligible for these funds, but there seems to be some confusion on that matter. Recently, my staff shared with USDA some parcels of particular concern, and would just ask today that you perhaps look into that and be willing to work with my staff and your folks on the ground in Utah to see if we can complete that trail.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I am aware of the great work on the Bonneville Shore Trail. It's a part of our shared stewardship ethic that we work across boundaries, and we are absolutely committed to work with your staff on outstanding questions.
Thank you, and thanks for your personal awareness of that issue. Recently, my office sent a letter outlining concerns we've heard from outfitters in the Salt Lake area. In short, many of them feel that there's been difficulty in getting the permits necessary to provide recreational outfitters and guide services for the area. Just wanted to see if that, you were also aware of that, and if by chance that letter had come to your attention.
Yes, Congressman, the letter just recently was sent, and I am aware of it. I've asked our regional forester to make it a priority that we look into those questions and concerns.
Thank you. Last May, Secretary Perdue and our governor, Governor Herbert, signed a shared stewardship agreement letter to protect communities and watersheds by addressing the threat of wildfires in Utah. I understand that some of these projects are already underway. Are you able to speak to any progress that's been made in Utah for preparing for this upcoming fire season?
Yes, I'm very pleased to say that Utah is leading the way, quite frankly, in this notion of shared stewardship, that we look comprehensively at mutual priorities and goals. We leverage our collective resources, and we get the strategic work done in the right place at the right scale, really addressing what I call the scale mismatch. The size of our threats to our forests and our watershed are greater than the response we've been able to do to date. The Utah had a foundational initiative, the Watershed Restoration Initiative, that we've really built on, and I use Utah as a good example often.
Thank you. It doesn't surprise me. I'm frequently proud of my state, and I would hope that we would be among your star states for cooperation and working together on a very serious problem. We talk a lot about deferred maintenance backlog at the Department of the Interior, much of which is within the national park system, and it has to do with roads and infrastructure. While this is important, we shouldn't forget about the backlog at the Forest Service. Would you like to speak towards this a little bit more, the maintenance needs, and what Congress should be aware of when it deals with service and the importance of the forest roads to rural communities?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, I'd like to expand on that a little bit more from my opening statement. As you all know, Forest Service has a robust multiple-use mission. We certainly provide access to recreation for over 150 million Americans. But as I said in my opening statement, we have 370,000 miles of road, and it really does connect. It's a large part of connecting rural America. So it's more than just the access. It's more than just getting the work done. It's a connection of rural America, primarily in the West, but we are absolutely committed to get the right work, focused right work done on maintenance backlog should this Congress see to help us with additional resources.
Thank you. Deputy Director Ned, in light of the administration's change of heart on LWCF since the budget was submitted, I have a question that I'd like to ask you, and let me kind of paint the framework for that. Part of the challenge of LWCF is that many folks on the Hill don't know and aren't aware of how the program actually operates. In a letter in 2015, the chairman of this committee said to Mr. Bishop, each and every acquisition is reviewed by the agency before being approved by Congress. The fact of the matter is, in many scenarios, neither is occurring. This committee has sought information on the LWCF from consecutive administrations. What land do we own? How much land has been bought? Why was it bought? Where is it located? Rarely have we gotten the answers to these questions. Part of the problem is that under the current framework, no one seems to know. I have a few seconds left. This is just a yes or no. Before Congress gets voting on the permanent mandatory LWCF bill, will you commit to brief the senators and House representatives on how this program works?
Congressman, I will certainly take that back to the Secretary and the Director, and we will do our best.
All right, that wasn't a commitment, but you're lucky I'm out of time, and I yield my time, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes Mr. Neguse for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief Christensen and Deputy Director Ned, for being here today. Given that 53% of my district, Colorado's 2nd District, consists of public lands, today's topic is certainly an important one to me. Not only is the majority of my district public lands, but the district is also home to the most visited national forest in the nation, White River National Forest, consisting of 2.3 million acres, 11 ski resorts, 8 wilderness areas, 10 mountain peaks over 14,000 feet, and 2,500 miles of trails. No surprise that how we manage our public lands is always the top of mind for my constituents. I want to start by saying, Chief Christensen, to welcome you back to the committee, and I do appreciate the work that the Forest Service has done in the last year to communicate with local officials in my district at the county level regarding issues such as fire bans. I know, I believe at this hearing a year ago, we had a conversation and exchange, and your staff dutifully followed up with us and our local officials, and so I want to say thank you in that regard. I do want to talk a little bit about, in terms of the Forest Service's budget, prospectively for fiscal year 2021, we've heard a lot of concerns from some local officials and folks in our local communities across the district around staffing levels and the need to make sure that the budget is as robust as can be so that it's addressing the local needs of the communities where these forests are located. The Sulphur Ranger District, which I'm sure, Chief Christensen, you're aware of, up in Grand County in particular, my understanding has suffered some setbacks in terms of personnel loss, and as a result, that has a number of different implications, more broadly speaking, for the way in which our local communities and the Forest Service interact, and our need to be able to rely on your hardworking staff in the various ranger districts across the country. So with that said, the budget that's been submitted, I know, reduces the Forest Service's overall FTE around somewhere between 475 to 500 folks, understanding that most of those folks, or maybe half of them, are on the research side. But I guess I would ask for your commitment to work with us and members of this committee in terms of making sure that the needs are being addressed at these ranger districts, notwithstanding the personnel reductions that are proposed.
Absolutely, Congressman. Let me just say that the fire funding fix that the last Congress, 2 Congresses passed, is greatly stabilized the reduction that we were in. You are right, there were tough choices and trade-offs in this budget proposal. There was far less in research than there is in the ranger and the forest supervisor's office in the balance of our staffing. We are absolutely committed to get every dollar out and to the ground. I've made it a priority since I've been chief that we don't hold that in growth in the Washington office, and we'd be glad to work with you on that.
Thank you. And I do think, the budget is proposed as a baseline for this committee and for the Congress to consider, but ultimately we as members ought to apply our judgment as well as we engage in this process based in part on our own experiences from the districts that we represent. And so given that, I certainly think that during the appropriation cycle this year, we ought to make a very hard push to increase the levels associated with personnel for these ranger districts so that local communities across not just my state, but the states of many of the members who are represented here today are fully prepared. The last point, Chief Christensen, that I wanted to ask you about was the Wildlife and Fish Research Program and the Recreation Research Program. And I guess what I'm wondering is if you can kind of provide some broader context to the committee about the decision around cutting those 2 programs.
Thank you for that question, Congressman. It was a very difficult trade-off decision. I will freely say that. We are very proud of our research organization that is embedded inside the Land Management Agency, and we have a broader mission to help sustain the nation's forests and grasslands. It's absolutely critical for us to function. With that said, we had to make some trade-off decisions about where we were going to make the cuts to meet the administration's baseline proposals. And fish, wildlife, and recreation research are the areas where we think we could supplement from academia, contract work, and we have some significant resources in our National Forest System staff that can provide those habitat information, recreational user monitoring. I'd be glad to give you more information and a more robust dialogue about that.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair recognizes Mr. McClintock for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chief Christensen, welcome back to the subcommittee. I want to thank you again for the engagement that you've shown with respect to the management of the Sierra Nevada. I recall you're flying out within days of your appointment on Mother's Day, and you're a mom, on Mother's Day so that you could meet with local communities throughout the Sierra the next morning. And that kind of engagement is something that is so welcomed and so refreshing, and I want to thank you for that. I hope you'll forgive me for touching on a parochial matter first, and that's the French Meadows project. That's a forest restoration and fuels reduction project at the headwaters of the Middle Fork of the American River on the Tahoe National Forest in my district, absolutely essential to the Placer County Water Agency that initiated this project. It's located on federal lands, but the watershed is densely overgrown, posing a catastrophic threat to the water supply of a major community in the region. This project, of course, is to restore forest health and protect the vital water supply and hydroelectric assets in the French Meadows region. On the ground implementation started last summer. It's being funded by local, state, and federal entities as well as private entities. But we need an ongoing commitment to maintain the healthy forest conditions as we jointly restore the French Meadows. I just wanted to get your perspective on that and your commitment that the Forest Service will continue to support this collaborative project.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm well aware of the French Meadows project. In fact, I have an invitation, and it's still my commitment to personally get out and see that project because I'm tracking it quite closely. This is a model for how, as you said, the local, the state, and the federal entities come together around a mutual priority that has interest across boundaries. And in the California Shared Stewardship Draft Agreement that is not yet signed, we're just getting that scheduled, watershed health and community protection is one of the highest mutual priorities that the state and the Forest Service had stated together. So absolutely, I'm all in.
Great, thank you very much. Getting a more broad question of forest management, we used to make money thinning our forests and maintaining the tree density to a level that the land can actually support. As you know, throughout the Sierra, we're carrying about 4 times the timber density that the land can support. And it's now costing us money whenever we try to thin a forest. What has happened?
Well, you have really named it, Congressman. We have overly dense forests for a variety of reasons. 100 years of excluding fire, where many of these forests needed fire, and the lack.
Well, they either needed fire or they needed thinning.
Or they needed thinning, right.
The reason why we have a Forest Service is because we decided not to consign our forests to a condition of benign neglect and allow them to become morbidly overgrown, become susceptible to disease, pestilence, drought, and ultimately catastrophic wildfire. And they produced those thinning projects produced a revenue stream which funded not only the Forest Service, but 25% of the proceeds from the auction of surplus federal timber went directly into the local communities that were directly impacted by those federal lands. I mean, all those federal lands are off the local tax rolls. They have enormous restrictions in terms of economic activity, and the idea was that we would be in not only maintaining and tending to our forests, that the surplus timber would then provide a revenue stream both for the Forest Service and for the local communities.
Yeah, yes, you're absolutely correct, Congressman. That's why we are laser focus on building markets for that small, what is really low-value wood. As you may know, we just signed a 20-year stewardship agreement.
We used to auction off high-value timber as well, and it was that mix that provided a positive revenue flow. You know, in terms of fire management, I looked at these numbers and I thought they were rather interesting. In pre-Columbian times in California, we would lose between 8 and 12 million acres a year to catastrophic fire. We introduced the Forest Service and good forest management. That figure dropped to 250,000 acres of catastrophic fire losses a year throughout the last half of the 20th century. But when we consigned our forests back to a condition of benign neglect, we're up to 2 to 3 million acres of loss to catastrophic fire. That's not a new normal. That's the old normal reasserting itself because we have failed to manage our forests.
Yes, Congressman.
The chair now, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Deputy Director Ned, I've been trying to find someone in the administration that can answer a very basic question about the revenue projections for the Arctic Refuge lease sale, which this administration is rushing to get out the door this year by all accounts. I had Assistant Secretary Combs before the full committee last week, and I asked her about the projections on revenue from that lease sale. She was completely unable to answer the basis for this billion-dollar revenue projection, and she suggested that I talk to BLM because they're in the business of oil and gas leasing. And so I think today might be my lucky day. I've got the Deputy Director of Operations from BLM before me. So let's dig in on this pretty straightforward question. As you know, in the Republican tax law and also in this year's budget from the administration, there is a projection of $1 billion of revenue from that Arctic Refuge lease sale, correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay, what's the basis for that projection?
Congressman, I did not write the tax bill, so I have no idea. I cannot give you the details of how they got to that bill.
All right, how about the budget then? Because you're the Deputy Director of Operations at BLM. Presumably you know something about how this $1 billion of revenue projected from this lease sale came to be in your budget.
Again, Congressman, the bill projected that the BLM would offer about approximately 400,000 acres of land for leasing, and based on that projection, it is my understanding that through the CBO and other office, a projection was made.
So they're only going to offer 400,000 acres, and they're assuming $1 billion. That's remarkable, because if you offered the entire 1.5 million acres of the coastal plain, you'd have to get $678 per acre from that lease sale in order to get to $1 billion. If you did only 400,000 acres, you'd have to get a lot more than that. Do you think that's a reasonable number to assume from this lease sale? You're in the business, by the way, of oil and gas leasing, so I think you're the right guy to ask this question.
Again, Congressman, if we was to look at the lease sale that has been happening in the NPRA for similarities, we've had lease sale that is well out over $900 per an acre. So there is...
When was that? Because since 1999, the average per acre price has been about $32 per acre in the neighboring National Petroleum Reserve. When was this north of $900 per acre lease sale?
So again, Congressman, we can get you an exact number, but...
Well, you're
again,
right here. Just give me when was it? You just threw this out, so you must have some knowledge about it.
Again, Congressman, we know we've had sale where an acre is sold for at least $900, but again...
Well, that was not since at least 1999. The trend has been downward. In fact, the most recent lease sale was $11 per acre. And you're talking about projecting many, many times more than that for the Arctic Refuge, where we have no data, where we have no infrastructure. Do you think that's reasonable?
Again, I will stick by what the tax bill and what the budget has said, and that is a projection, Congressman.
All right, and by the way, that projection was before the global oil market tanked this week. And it was before most of our country's major lenders started declaring that they won't go anywhere near financing drilling in the Arctic. And that was before BP walked away from Alaska. Do you really think that assuming this sky-high revenue projection from a lease sale where we have no data about what's even in the ground there is reasonable, especially given your position of trust on behalf of the American taxpayers to make sure we're not giving away public resources?
Again, Congressman, in my 28 years, I've seen the oil market go up and down, and so again, the projection is there and the oil market tends to bounce back.
All right, so you would agree that your job is to make sure you get good value for the American taxpayers, right?
A fair return for the American taxpayer.
All right, and given these projections seemingly completely out of touch with any possible comparable from the National Petroleum Reserve in recent time, wouldn't it be prudent to put a minimum bid requirement in place to make sure you get that value?
Again, Congressman, we will, as we structure the sale, we will make certain there's a fair return to the American
So
taxpayer.
does that mean you will require a minimum bid to make sure you're not giving this away for pennies?
I will guarantee we will have a bid that guarantee a fair return to the American taxpayer.
Is there a point at which that number is low enough that you say, this is not good enough, we got to walk away from this, or will you just take whatever is offered?
Again, Congressman, we ensure there's a fair return to the American taxpayer, and so...
But you won't give me any example. If it's $5 an acre, is that a fair return? Will you walk away from that?
Again, as I sit here today, I do not have the projection because...
You can't even say that you would walk away from $5 an acre when you're proposing something that's north of $1,000 an acre.
What I can say is we will make certain we get a fair return for the American taxpayer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ned. It sure sounds to me like you're dodging a very specific question, and you're much more interested in rushing to give this away to the oil and gas industry than actually getting that fair return to the American taxpayers. With that, I yield back. The chair recognizes Mr. Fulcher for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Christensen and Deputy Director Ned, thank you for being here. I represent the great state of Idaho, and you both play a big role there. As you know, between BLM and Forest Service, we've got about 2/3 of the landmass. And so this is a huge issue. And I want to echo what my colleague in Colorado said just a little bit earlier. Your communication with us has been good. Certainly improving over previous years. And I can't tell you how much that means. It's just, so my constituents we want somebody to work with. And so thank you for doing that. Mr. Ned, my questions, or my comments are primarily going to be with Chief Christensen, because we had Susan Combs here last week. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. But, so that's the first thing. Thank you for the communication. We need it desperately. It's a huge part of our life and our economy there, and we just have to have somebody to work with. First thing is just a reminder. We've got a major EIS underway, and we have had some help with that. That's the Stibnite Gold Project, and I just want to let you know that that's getting a lot of attention on our side. Also, the reminder that there's legacy waste that goes back to World War II, and we're still trying to figure out how to mitigate that. And I don't know how that's going to work out. You probably don't know how that's going to work out, but just know that that's underway. This is an important project for us, and there will probably a need for more ongoing dialogue on that as we move forward. Got to shift gears, if I may, now to the fire situation. It's my understanding that you have at least considered a year-round firefighting staff, and I'd just like to get your input on that.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. This committee has heard me say more than once that we now have a fire year, not just a fire season, as we look across the whole of the United States. So we are taking a very hard look at a contemporary wildland firefighting force. You may know that Interior did have an increased request in their budget to put full-time firefighters on. We are actively studying this because we want to show where the trade-off of the investment would be. Additionally, not only do we have a year-round fire year, but it would be a workforce that could significantly contribute when they're not responding to fire to this hazardous fuels backlog, getting more work done on the ground.
And so, and honestly, I don't know the answer, but I have mixed feelings about it. And the reason I do is are we wiser steering more of that effort and resource towards fuel load management? Because in our state, that is the issue. It's not being able to get access to high-risk areas. And again, I'm not throwing out an opinion, I'm throwing out a discussion point here.
Yes, you hit one of the key points that we're looking at very, very hard. The cost to we call them term appointments, to lay these folks off and bring them back on is significant. And can we have a workforce that would give them year-round employment and boost the additional capacity that we need? There's a lot of details and questions in that study. We'd be glad to get with you and talk about it.
To the extent there's an option, the ability to interact on that, I'd like to be part of that discussion with your department if possible and if constructive.
We appreciate your inquiry.
Thank you, and I'm going to use that as a segue. I've got a minute left here. I interact with our Forest Service personnel within our state, and I know that there has been some challenges, like with a lot of different areas, on staff and recruitment and the ability to get the right people, put them in the right places. Could you talk about that, where you stand with that right now?
Yes, we are addressing that on multiple fronts. As I said earlier, we are prioritizing getting all dollars, every dollar out to the field. Any extra dollars that we have from the fire funding fix, we stabilized the decline. There were some tough choices and trade-offs in this administration's proposed budget, but we are committed to getting more staffing of folks on the ground. Additionally, we are throughout USDA and also within our own agency at the Forest Service, we are working hard on how we reform our hiring practices so we can get people hired quicker and get them to work.
I think we're out of time, but I'm just going to close with this. Thank you again for working with us, and just know that I know, and I think you know, we need each other. This is a massive, massive project. We want to work with you, not against you, okay?
You bet.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lowenthal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming, Chief Christensen and Deputy Director Ned. As you're aware, that leasing near the boundary waters has been the subject of an oversight by this committee, among others, including formal document requests. I'd like to draw your attention to the screen. We see here the cover page for the Northern Minnesota Federal Minerals Withdrawal, the environmental assessment for Northern Minnesota, and now we get the report itself. There wasn't one word in the report, in the assessment that was provided. So we're talking about a document that was dated September of 2018, taking over 20 months to prepare, taxpayers funded, but everything has been redacted. We don't know anything about what this study did. The question is, why did this happen? Why was everything redacted? Why was this study, Chief Christensen, canceled? It looks to us it was done for political reasons, because it would have outlined a case against sulfide ore mining near the boundary waters. Can you explain that, why the entire assessment was redacted?
Yeah, the environmental assessment was not finalized, and it remains a draft. Therefore, a draft was redacted.
So there is a study going on. There is a study. We're just not able, because it's not a final study, we're not able to get to see that. And so since it was a draft, you just redacted everything.
The Agriculture Secretary Perdue decided that in Minnesota, a case-by-case approach rather than the 20-year administrative withdrawal was the way he chose to go.
So you're saying it's a case by case, so you redacted everything in a study that was paid for by the taxpayers that no one can see, because you're going to do a study. We're not allowed to see that study, is that true?
No,
It's a
not
draft, you're saying, will it be completed?
The study was based on consideration of an administrative withdrawal. And the secretary made a decision to look at mining in the greater Rainy River watershed.
All right.
Based
the
on case by case.
Okay, if you're going case by, this document was received in response to a public FOIA request, but the committee has not received any other similar documentation, whether it's redacted or otherwise, in response to our oversight. Can you provide us with some of the more specific studies in terms of our oversight, the other requests that we've asked for?
Yes, Congressman, I know that the USDA department staff are willing to meet with you to discuss your oversight request further.
So now, instead of responding to, you're saying now that they would like to set up a meeting, is that it?
Yes,
Instead
sir.
of responding to us? Well, thank you, that's at least a step forward then from where we've been up until now. Next thing is I'd like to ask Deputy Director Ned, as you're aware, there was a legal opinion by the solicitor that reinterpreted the Forest Service's role, that was Solicitor Giorgiani, so that their consent was not required for the renewal of the Twin Metals leases near the boundary waters. However, it's my understanding that there are several other leases pending in the same area, and that any additional leases are going to require the consent of the Forest Service. So it's just these leases that do not need the Forest Service's oversight. Are there other leases near the Twin Metals parcel, and that the U.S. Forest Service consent is required for the development of those parcels?
Congressman, as I sit here today, I don't have an exact memory of all the leases that is involved.
Are
However,
there other leases, though? Any
the other leases, I do not, so I cannot answer your
So
question
you do not
directly.
know whether the Forest Service will continue to provide or consent to all the other leases? Just these leases are the only ones that they are no longer going to be in the process?
Again, it's been a while since I read the M opinion, so I cannot remember exactly which lease is in, which leases is out, so I cannot give you a precise answer right now, Congressman.
Will you commit to the Forest Service upholding its legal requirement to protect the boundary waters by ensuring that the Forest Service consent is done, it's science-based, and includes any new information?
I will commit to abide by our lawyer's guidance under the M opinion, Congressman, and so I will commit to that.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gomert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank both of our witnesses for being here today. I do appreciate, Chief, your being here, both of you, but wanted to ask about the national forests. And you know my concerns from prior discussions, but there's a Red Hill Lake Recreation Area in Sabine National Forest. And, you know, in East Texas, it gets very hot, 100 degrees. We have a lot of humidity. But that place is only open 107 days out of the year between Memorial Day and Labor Day, the hottest time of the year. What are the impediments to having this recreation area open more than just the hottest days of the year? Maybe some days when it's nice outside, it's comfortable outside, spring and fall.
Yeah, I hear your concerns, Congressman. I'm not familiar with the precise decisions of this recreation site, but I'd be happy to look into it, and we'll get back to you.
Well, and of course, I still have great concerns about the stewardship program. I know that a friend from Arkansas seems pleased with it, but I'd read that, let's see, in fiscal year 2018, the entirety of the national forests and grasslands in Texas had 117,981 centimeter cubic feet of timber that was harvested under stewardship contracts. The stumpage value was $4.5 million or so dollars. And according to fingertip facts, the Forest Service kept the big bulk of that money. I still have grave concerns over the stewardship program. When we have counties like Sabine County, where they received as part of their 25% from timber being harvested, and these are renewable pine trees, by the way, one of our great renewable resources, but they received over $2.4 million in 1996. In 2016, they got $65,000, and that's divided between the county for roads and the county schools. So that is absolutely devastating to the county. Other counties like Shelby, Angelina had received $335,000 20 plus years ago and got $16,000 in 2016. So it really is devastating to those counties. Are you looking at all at the stewardship program and the devastation it is causing to some of our rural counties?
Absolutely. It's one of our priorities is to be able to sustain the rural economies, including the county governments. The counties in Texas are under secure rural schools, so they are getting full payment for the products that would have come off those lands. Yeah. Stewardship contracting is one tool that we use. When you say the Forest Service keeps the funds, it's to reinvest back into the land, to the access, to the...
That's what they say, but the counties have seen no benefit, really. Benefits, sure, to the Forest Service people working there, but not benefits to their local economy, not benefits to the people of those counties. So I know we keep hearing about what a great beneficial thing this stewardship is, but stewardship should be more than just about fixing things that the Forest Service people on the scene would like to have fixed up for themselves. And as far as the secure rural schools, that is getting more and more difficult to keep passage of, and I'm sure you're aware it lapsed in 2016. So it's tough to get that passed. It's becoming tougher and tougher when the whole purpose for the National Forest Service was because the federal government would do a better job of managing renewable resources and ensuring the local economy. That has gone away, so I'm still thinking we may need to get rid of some of the national forests, give it back to the local or state people so that they don't get devastated like this year after year. My time's expired.
Mr. Garcia, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Thank you, Deputy Director Ned and Chief Christensen. Mr. Ned, last week, Assistant Secretary Combs appeared before this committee, and I expressed some frustration about the BLM reorganization. This committee has contended that these moves were best hastily planned and a waste of taxpayer dollars, and at worst, an effort to force federal employees out of work. On several occasions, our committee has asked the department for more information, but the department has failed to comply. The small amount of information we have received has not demonstrated a well-considered or planned process. And now we know that the Government Accountability Office agrees with that assessment. They found the reorganization to have substantially ignored key best practices. So I want to follow up on my questions to Ms. Combs to see if you agree with her assessment or not. Yes or no? Should an agency have specific performance measures to determine whether a reorganization is successful?
Congressman, thank you for that question, but the BLM did a relocation, and so I can speak to relocation.
So yes or no?
Again, Congressman, I can speak to
So
relocation.
you won't answer that. Should any reorganization have a cost-benefit analysis with a sensitivity analysis?
Again, Congressman, I would be glad to speak to the relocation that the
Should an
BLM
agency
undertakes.
reorganization have an implementation plan?
Again, Congressman, I would be glad to speak to the
Should
relocation
an
of the
agency
BLM.
reorganization have a clear continuity of operations plan to ensure no loss of work product or knowledge?
Again, Congressman, I would be
All right,
glad to
I
speak.
take
Mr.
it
Ned,
all
do you
of those-
do you understand the question, Mr. Ned?
I understand the question, and I can speak to the BLM relocation.
He's asking your opinion.
Again, my opinion, I'd be glad to give on the BLM relocation, Congressman.
And finally, should an agency reorganization include input from agency staff and assess the plan's impact on staff retention?
Again, Congressman, I would be glad to speak to the BLM relocation.
Well, as I told Ms. Combs, all of these documents have been requested by this committee on multiple occasions, but the department has failed to provide them to us or GAO. And the few responsive documents we have received show only inadequate analysis, unacceptable in any other job or sector. Can you tell me whether the department has provided all of the documents requested by the committee about the BLM relocation?
It is my understanding the department has provided a number of documents. I cannot speak specifically to what has been provided and has not.
The BLM's mission is important to every American, whether you're from Nevada or from Chicago. Your agency manages public lands that belong to all Americans. You manage energy production and habitat protections, which impact our climate for worse or for better. You manage more tribal cultural resources and paleontological resources than any federal agency. While many Americans don't interact with the BLM on a daily basis, its activities touch their lives. This administration had no right or call to dismantle this important agency, and your continued stonewalling of Congress on this issue is unacceptable. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. As we conclude this hearing, let me just say, Mr. Ned, that as the Deputy Director of Operations for BLM, your unwillingness to answer the most basic questions about the operations of your agency, including numbers of personnel, these questions about a reorganization plan that surely you are familiar with, my questions about revenue projections for an Arctic lease sale that you know you're quite familiar with. It's shocking. It is incumbent on this administration to at least provide a modicum of cooperation in the oversight process and not send forward witnesses who have knowledge but won't share it with this committee, who repeat pat answers that are devoid of information over and over like a wind-up doll. This is a disgrace. So please convey back to the Department of Interior, including the Secretary, who refuses to ever testify before our committees on these questions, that we intend to continue to pursue vigorous oversight, and I believe the American people deserve cooperation. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions. The members of this committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit written questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days to allow for responses. If there's no further business before the committee, we're adjourned.